Air is thinner, that extra few inches underneath my feet. I'm 5'8" on like a good day, you understand? Like I was 5'9" in my 30s, but you know, things happen, and you just sort of get a little tinier as the years go on. So I'm gonna use this. I may take this step with me for my next presentation if y'all don't have a problem with that. It is an honor to be with you here today. First off, it is an honor to be allowed to come and speak about these things. I'm from Tennessee. They don't allow this where I'm from. I'm sure they'll have an MLK celebration in Tennessee, but it'll be neutered of all content. It will be stripped of all radicalism. It will be stripped of all the truth that we can speak, at least still in this state and on this campus, because of the commitment that you all have made. So give yourselves a big hand for not capitulating to the politics of fear and backlash and resentment that is sweeping the nation. Secondly, it is of course an honor to speak on a day where we honor the history, the legacy, and the work of Dr. King, and maybe more so this year than ever because of the tragic irony that we will be celebrating his birthday on Monday, on the day when a man will be re-inaugurated as president of this country who rejects everything that the man we honor on that day stood for. And so it is especially important for me to say what I have to say today, and for you all to continue the work that you are doing. I keep hearing people saying, as we prepare for the re-inauguration of this man at the head of government, that all of the things he has planned for us are unprecedented. They say things every time there is another spasm of anti-black or brown violence, another spasm of racial violence and hatred. They say the same thing. They say, this is not who we are, America, which leads me to ask them if they have ever met their country. Have y'all met? Because if you have met your country, you would know, as the Congresswoman alluded to a few minutes ago, that none of this is new. It is not unprecedented. It is not new. It is not original. It is part and parcel of our entire history. You can think of Donald Trump as a reversion to type, y'all. And everything since the founding to this has just been an intermission. You see, like, we got all spoiled and thought that we had made all of this progress, and it's like intermission at a Broadway show, where you get up and you stretch your legs and you use the restroom and you get some candy or some popcorn or whatever you get, refreshment, and then it's back to the show. It's like back on Sundays when I was a kid. Y'all might remember back in the day when they only had NFL games on CBS. And they had the 3 o'clock game where I'm from in Central Time. Probably that's when it was out here too. Eastern it would have been 4. 3 o'clock game, and it never got finished in time for 60 minutes at 6 o'clock. It would always bleed over into the 6 o'clock hour, and they would come on when 60 minutes was ready. When the game was over, they would come on and say, now back to your regularly scheduled programming. That's what Monday is, y'all. It is the regularly scheduled programming. It is not an aberration. It is a fulfillment of a sad and tragic legacy that has been a part of this country since its inception. And I know we're not supposed to say that. And I'm not allowed to say it in 25 states without risking my own professional career and the careers of anybody foolish enough to bring me in. But y'all are okay for now, so I'm just going to say what I have to say. Let us be very clear that the multiracial democracy that we seek and that we fight for and that we must recommit to every day, especially after this coming Monday, is something that was never promised, and it was not the intention of the people who created this country. Now, it can be our intention, and it should be our goal, but it was not theirs. And we do ourselves a disservice when we act like that isn't true, because it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound nice, and it hurts some folks' feelings. But they had no intention of extending the promise of liberty and democracy to all. They made it clear. The 3/5 Compromise in the Constitution made it clear. The Fugitive Slave Clause in the Constitution made it clear, as did the very first thing that Congress did of any substance after the Constitution was ratified. Do y'all know what that was? The very first significant piece of legislation they passed after the Constitution was ratified was a thing called the Naturalization Act of 1790. And what did the Naturalization Act of 1790 say? Because keep in mind now, if it's the first thing you do, it must be awfully important. Right? There's a lot of things they could have done first. You might have thought they were going to try to figure out the tax and revenue system. They got to raise money for the new government, but they were like, yeah, we'll get to that. We got to do this other thing first. You might have thought that they would have said, hey, we better get the military ready because the Brits may come and try to have another run. You know, that's possible. And you might think that would have been a logical first thing. But they said, you know, we'll get to that. But we have to do this first. So what was the Naturalization Act? It basically just said one thing. It said all free white persons and only free white persons could be citizens of this country. That was the most important thing on their agenda and on their minds, was making sure everybody knew who this was for and who it was not for. So when we talk about a country that refuses to engage the legacy of systemic racism and gets angry when we suggest that racism has been embedded in this country from the start, they are ignoring their history, rewriting their history, asking us to remain ignorant in the face of that history. But Dr. King would have told the truth. He did tell the truth, and I will tell it today. Was intended only for the few. If we want it to be for all, that's on us. History certainly won't do it for us, and the legacy of those who brought this country into being will not do it for us, but now the legacy of those who have expanded those blessings will. The legacy and the work of those who have fought to make it what it was never intended to be, that is the tradition in which we walk. But in order to do that appropriately, we have to be honest about the forces that we face. And too many people don't want us to do that. And so in 24 states, they have passed laws, and probably come next week, there will be an executive order extending that to all states. So get ready. Get ready. Because all the nice white liberals in Seattle won't be able to stop them from trying to do what they're trying to do. And I know that black and brown folk understand when I talk about the nice white liberals in Seattle. Y'all know exactly what I mean. I know that nice white liberals are like, wait, what? But just understand, right, that all the liberalism in the world, all the progressivism in the world, all the stated principles and bumper stickers and signs in your yard, all of those things are not going to stop what is coming. It is going to require more than that. Because they will extend this ban on divisive concepts in schools, or at least they will try, to every state. They're threatening to take away the endowments of colleges that do DEI or any kind of equity work at all, so y'all better be ready. And not ready to capitulate like some folks already are. We already have people in this country that are, sort of preemptively complying with the nonsense that's coming. We have to have people courageous enough to stand up and tell the truth. And I know y'all will be those people, but I'm just saying it so you hear it today. And that you remember it tomorrow and going forward, because it is coming. The ability to actually tell the truth is under attack as a divisive concept. They say we aren't allowed in school to use terms like systemic racism, or to suggest that America was always a racist country and it was embedded in this country from the start. But you know who said that that was the case? Dr. King did. Now you won't hear that Dr. King quoted on Monday. They never quote that Dr. King. They take one line out of one speech, which I gather is the only speech they ever heard the man give. Now, he was a minister. He preached every Sunday. And he spoke on a lot of other days of the week, but they only got, it's like this man stood up in Washington, gave one line about judging people on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, and then he just sat down, and then a few years later he got shot for it. You don't get shot for that line. You don't get shot for that sanitized version of a vision of America. You get shot because you said some other things. And you believed in some other things. And here's what Dr. King said in the last essay that he wrote before he was assassinated. Now, it was published after his assassination. It was published in the pages of Playboy, and I only know about that because I read it for the articles. Y'all understand? That is a joke that will only hit for people who are over 40. But y'all can tell the young folks what I mean by that. This essay was in the pages of Playboy, and Dr. King in those pages, in his words, said that white America was poisoned to its soul by racism. Racism which was, and these are his words, as native to the soil of this country as sagebrush, pine trees, and buffalo grass. That Dr. King will not be quoted on Monday. But that's the one who lived in reality. See, the king of memory and the king of reality are two very different ones. And we have to cleave to the real one, the one who said those things, the one who told us all of the things which the schools in this country are increasingly being prohibited from telling. If they get their way, we won't be able to tell the truth about what this man believed and what he said. We will strip all of that out of the textbooks in the name of not having certain people get in their feelings about a critique of America and a critique of white supremacy as a system that has guided this country for far too long. Whenever people of color have made progress in this country, we have seen exactly the kind of backlash that we see right now. Carol Anderson, brilliant scholar at Emory University, writes about that in her book, White Rage. Every step forward met by the kind of backlash that we are seeing right now. Right? It happened after the end of enslavement, during the period of Reconstruction, a mass increase in violence. And the end of Reconstruction overthrown by former enslavers, human traffickers. Right? It happened when black folk left the South during the Great Migration and were met by riots and violence and redlining and discrimination in the North and the Midwest and out West. It happened during the Civil Rights era. It happened after affirmative action. It happened after the election of Barack Obama. It happens every time anything moves the ball forward, even symbolically, on the road to racial justice. So much so that now, DEI has become an all-purpose slur. DEI is the new N-word that folks feel they can say without fear of repercussion. Anything that goes wrong on their job, in their company, in government, they will blame it on DEI. So if a barge hits a bridge in Baltimore and knocks it down, they say it's the fault of who? The DEI mayor. As if somehow, if the mayor were a white guy, the bridge would have been stronger. He would have somehow fortified it with his white man magic. Right? Last year, when an airplane had a door blowout, remember the airplane had the door blowout at like 30,000 feet? And they blamed that on DEI and Boeing. Because they have a program, I guess, to encourage folks of color to become pilots or something. I don't think pilots put the door on, by the way, right? I don't think that's a thing, but they blamed it on DEI. If it had just been white men at the machinist union soldering the door on to the plane, it wouldn't have happened. Listen, I gave a speech at Local 751 of the Boeing Machinist Union about 20 years ago. I saw plenty of white men. There are plenty of them still there, putting the doors on, and I'm not saying it's their fault, but I know damn good and well it was not black folks' fault. It was not brown folks' fault, but they blamed it on that. The fires that are ravaging Los Angeles right now, Elon Musk insists what? That's about DEI, because they spent so much time trying to diversify the fire department that they didn't take care of learning how to fight fires. Elon Musk insists that DEI is to blame for everything that goes wrong. Now, I would note, as a side note, his rocket blew up yesterday. And it's not the first time. He's had a few of these blow up. Right? So I guess the white men who work on his rockets, right, aren't nearly as good as he would have us believe. Maybe they need a little DEI at SpaceX. But that's the kind of backlash that we face now. Anytime that folks of color or women of any color find themselves at the helm of a position they wouldn't have had previously, it is seen as reverse discrimination. It is seen as evidence of lowering standards because they assume by definition that those folks of color and those women of all colors are less qualified. They believe that because of racism and because of sexism, and we have to be prepared to call that out every single time that we hear it. We now face an even more systemic and institutional form of backlash, though, with Project 2025, which is promising, upon the resumption of the Trump regime, promising to roll back the progress of the last century, and certainly the last 70 years when it comes to racial justice. They are telling us what they intend to do. And among the things that they want to do, which has received almost no attention in the press, is they want to abolish the collection of data that would demonstrate racial disparity in any arena of life, whether that's poverty numbers, unemployment numbers, health outcomes, criminal justice outcomes, educational outcomes. Right? They want to ban the collection of data so that you will not be able to see the disparities. It becomes a see no evil, hear about no evil, therefore we can remedy no evil kind of mentality, right? If you just erase inequality from the public mind, and you strip us of the tools necessary to see it, then we can't address it. So you wouldn't be able to find out, for instance, in coming years, what we can find out now, which is, as one example, that even black folks with a college degree are almost twice as likely as white folks with a degree to be unemployed, even when they majored in the same subjects. That Latino folk with a degree are about 50% more likely than white folks with a comparable degree to be unemployed. That indigenous folk with a degree are about 2/3 more likely than comparable white folk with a degree to be unemployed. That Asian American and Pacific Islander folk with a degree about 15 to 20% more likely than comparable white folks to be out of work. That data exists now. And it compels us to think about how to remedy those gaps. But if you remove the data, there will be no ability to even see what is going on. You won't be able to recognize what we can recognize now, which is that even black households headed by a college graduate have 30% less wealth on average than white households headed by a high school dropout. Let me say it again. Black households headed by a college graduate, 30% less wealth on average than white households headed by somebody that did not finish high school. That is because of the legacy of unequal opportunity handed down generation in and generation out. And we can find that data today, but in a week or 2 weeks or 5 months, we may not be able to unless we raise our voice and demand that our government continue to keep tabs on racial injustice in this country. So how do we respond in this moment? Some would have you believe that the answer is to talk less about racism. These are the people who in the wake of the election said the reason the election went the way it did is that some folk were being too woke and focusing too much on identity politics. I beg to remind you, all politics is identity politics. If I appeal to you as a taxpayer, I'm appealing to an identity. If I appeal to you as a parent worried about schools in your community, I'm appealing to your identity. If I appeal to you as a white evangelical Christian, I'm appealing to you on the basis of your identity, but we never call that identity politics. And I would beg to remind you, if I say we should pay more attention to the white working class, that's an identity too, y'all. Only someone deliberately blind to the realities of this country would think that white working class people are identity-less avatars of universality. So the idea that we need to talk less about race and identity and more about class, I beg to remind you again that in 2020, when wokeness was on display in the streets of this country, 23 million people in the largest racial justice uprising in this country's history, the election went the other way, didn't it? So how can wokeness be to blame for 2024 when it didn't seem to hurt in 2020? Maybe we should have talked more about racial equity. Maybe we should have talked more about racial injustice so that those folks who stayed on the sidelines, who were inspired by that message 4 years ago, might have stayed in formation rather than falling out. So we don't need to talk less about it, but what we do need to do is connect it to the struggles of others. There's a way to talk about racial justice that connects it to the struggle of white working people. You don't have to choose either or. It's both and. The pain of black people metastasizes and becomes the pain of white people. We know that because the pain of black and brown folks in the war on drugs has now become the pain of opioid addiction in white communities. Because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we decided that drug use was a moral failing. Not a public health problem, but a moral failing that can only be handled with jail and prison cells. And now 40 years later, you got white families wondering why their little nephew, why their cousin, why their son, why their parents can't get rehab. I'll tell you why. Because we didn't put the money into rehabilitation, we put it into locking folks up. But because they lived on that side of town, you didn't care, and you voted for the very same people who are killing your children today. And becomes white pain. You have all these white folks in rural areas and small towns in the Rust Belt saying, where all the jobs go? Why don't y'all bring the jobs back to America? Why don't you bring the plant back to my community that used to be here? Here's an interesting fact. Those plants started abandoning black and brown communities 35 years ago. And black and brown folks said the same thing. Why don't y'all bring the jobs back? And you know what those folks said? Why don't y'all get up and move? Go where the jobs are. Pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. And now, 35 years later, the same corporate oligarchs that didn't give a damn about black and brown folk in urban areas find out they don't give a damn about your rural and small town ass. Black pain, brown pain, metastasizes and becomes white pain. Think about COVID. Which, by the way, is not over. Think about COVID. At the beginning of the pandemic, the first couple of months, right, only about 28% of those who had died, according to the CDC, in the first 2 months were white. So once it got known that this was a black person's problem and a brown person's problem, and the headline said it in April of 2020, that this was disproportionately killing folks of color. And within 2 weeks, what happened? White folks were at state capitals all around the country demanding that everything be opened back up. Because, see, it wasn't a problem for them. So they showed up in their camouflage with their semi-automatic weapons, demanding the right to go back to Olive Garden for endless breadsticks, demanding the right to get a haircut, demanding the right to go bowling, demanding the right to go to Buffalo Wild Wings. I gotta get back to my life because it's not hurting me and mine. See, but now stick around, and what happened? By the end of 2020, when all those folks decided they weren't at risk, so they weren't going to wear a mask, and they weren't going to stand 6 feet away from you at the Trader Joe's, and they were not going to get the vaccine because that's got some kind of satanic DNA in it, or whatever nonsense they were saying. We're not going to do any of that, and by the end of 2020, first couple of months of 2021, what do you know? Now 60% of the monthly dead were white folks. And today, 4 years in, about 63% of all those who have died have been white. What does that tell you? It tells you that if black lives had mattered in April and May and June of 2020, then a lot of white folks would still be with us today. But there are people who have buried their family members, buried their friends, buried their loved ones because we could not be bothered to engage in solidarity with those who were dying early. Black pain metastasizes and becomes white pain. And so at some point we have to tell that story. We have to make the case that Dr. King so eloquently tried to make, which was that all of those injustices that some face early eventually will come back around again. I realize that we in the white community were never taught that. But black and brown folks have lived it. And if we're paying attention and we're prepared to be courageous enough to talk to our people and to explain the connection between the pain of some and the pain of all, then we can create the kind of beloved community that Dr. King believed in. We can fulfill the promises not only of his dream and his vision, but of a multiracial democracy, even though the founders of this country did not believe in it, did not want it, and did not desire or fight for it. We are the new founders of a new country. And it is time for us to continue to get busy in the work that we all know has to be done. Thank you all so much for being here.